Hello and welcome back to Processing the Process, where we capture and discuss the technical, psychological, and contextual dynamics that shape the process of creating a work of art. Week by week, moment by moment, we're following Allie K. Dakers, teacher, actor, director, and producer, as she shapes the development of her innovative middle school drama club and guides her students' idiosyncratic artistic journeys. Now today will be a little bit different than what you've seen before in that we will be focusing on the March 20th Drama Club meeting, the March 22nd Playwriting Workshop, and the March 25th Extra Drama Club meeting, and we have a little extra treat thrown in there as well. So, thinking back to last week's videocast, I really see that Allie's big challenge at this stage is the juxtaposition of competing needs and conflicting dynamics. And I think there are four sets of them that really serve as the context within which everything in the drama club is taking place, and therefore worth laying out first now. So on one hand, allowing a free rein organic process to unfold, but on the other hand, hitting key benchmarks in accordance with a specific timetable. Then on one hand, enabling a chaotic flow of ideas without interfering so the kids can develop a sense of competence and independence. But on the other hand, intervening when the process is leading to an unproductive pursuit of ideas that aren't viable and wind up using up limited time. On the one hand, coaching the groups to edit, redirect, even abandon ideas in an attempt, quite frankly, to move that process along. And on the other hand, helping the kids to feel good about their contributions, even though they may be modified or eliminated. And finally, on the one hand, encouraging the parents to agree to and support additional rehearsal time, but on the other hand, needing to wait until later in the process when the scenes are actually established in order to create a scene rehearsal schedule. Now, I also realized that Allie pulled back the lens for all of us to see the bigger picture at this point in time, which is that the chaotic scene creation phase is a necessary and normal part of the process. And soon enough, it will be morphing into a period of fine-tuning and editing where the energy becomes more focused, the roles of the students become more differentiated, and the narrative arcs become clearer. So I think with that understanding, we can now move into the March 20th meeting, and I think the elements are really going to make sense now. So two developments occurred in this meeting that are going to help Allie accomplish more and spread herself a little less thin, thereby partially mitigating the time constraints. However, they're going to require a little bit of an upfront investment of time to train that, of course, will pay off a little bit later down the line. So first, there are two high school drama club kids who are now mentors for the middle school drama club. Allie, how do you think this is going to benefit you, benefit your middle school kids, and benefit these two high school kids?
First of all, I am eternally grateful to these two humans that have decided to join the family. One of them actually has gone through the program, which is great, so she knows the ins and outs. And the other one is new to the high school club and is just super excited and really wanting to lend a hand in any way that she can, which is fantastic. So both of the girls are super reliable, super helpful, and one has the experience and knows the drill. What they do, in just a clerical sense, they can take care of some of the different paperwork things that I might have done. Maybe it's just making sure one of the other kids is taking care of attendance. I like the middle school kids to do their own attendance. I have a check-in sheet that they know how to run, but I can give that to a mentor and say, get someone on this while I'm taking care of something else. They can help lead the warm-ups. They can help basically with kind of anything that I do, they can do, especially one of them who knows what it is that I do and what the process is. They also are helpful in helping me demonstrate chain of command. They're another puzzle piece in that chain of command.
Right.
With an example of, so under, Mrs. Akers is these high school kids, and then maybe this kid and this kid and this kid. But so they get to see this hierarchy kind of shape itself, which is pretty cool. Kids get more coaching. Kids see themselves in these older kids, so they have that as an influence and is where I'm headed. And, just the role model aspect for my older kids. It helps the older kids to develop their skills. It helps them to articulate what they know, and how do I, transfer my knowledge to somebody else. And sometimes, to be honest, it's different when we had spoken already that these are kids performing, and they have a different perspective and a different view. So maybe these high school kids have a different perspective than I do that might reach my younger kids in a way that I can't, which is helpful, and that's an interesting dynamic that I appreciate. And the really interesting thing, especially for my one that is a veteran, she's an alumni, I guess now, she basically was like, oh my gosh, really? This is what's been happening all these years? I'm like, yeah, welcome to the party. Now you can see this side, and oh my gosh, and yes, you were just like them, with love. But yes, the energy, all of that was there. So it's beyond helpful having them there. So.
Well, along those lines, there is now a middle school club member who has once again expressed his desire to be the stage manager. And Allie, how do you prepare him, or perhaps any kid, for this kind of position?
He did a great job last year, and what's crazy about his participation is that he had some sort of an event. It was a competition of some sort that he knew about but didn't know that he would be a part of until well into the process. It's one of those things that you make different rounds, and then eventually he discovered for last year that he was not going to be available on the day of performance, which was like, oh no, this poor kid. But despite that, he was still one of my lead writers for a couple of scenes, and certainly was able to move around, and he would tidy things up for me. I would say, I need you to denouement on this, tie these scenes together somehow, make it happen, work with that team. And then when it came time to Tech Week last year, he was this kid who just kind of was my odds and ends guy, I did not have to, I'm not backstage with them, they run the show themselves, and what he would do, he was the person as they were learning along the way throughout the course of those days. He was sort of picking up all of the bits that needed tending to, or making sure this kid had that, or this kid had that, or don't forget this, or don't forget that. And as the days went on, of course, we need fewer and fewer of these reminders, so that by the time it was his last tech, and the next day was the show that he wasn't in.
Right.
All of the pieces were in place, and he was integral to that. He was kind of that support system backstage that I could trust in, because he knew everything that had to be done. It's his personality as well, to kind of be in charge. And it was really valuable, and he enjoyed that experience as well, and came to me and said that he was interested. So how do I prepare him? Well, last year that really kind of organically came together. This year is a little different. He's formally requesting a role rather than it sort of just becoming something that he's doing because we know he's not going to be on stage. So I said, okay, so we know what that means. I said, you're going to round the kids up and you're going to lead the first warm-up, but I'm not telling them when to start. You're going to get them going, and you're going to get them in the circle, and you're going to have to do so with respectful leadership. We can't just be like, everybody come over here and I'm in charge and da-da-da, because, you give a kid power, and give anybody power, and you do need, that comes with responsibility, of course. So before we were all going inside and I was letting all the kids into the theater, I kind of had him hold back, and I mentioned, you had mentioned that you were interested, because now is time to kind of try on those shoes a little bit, and I told him his task, get them warmed up, etc. But I reminded him of that respectful leadership. I reminded him of tone of voice. I reminded him of word choice, and I reminded him that no one's going to respect you if you don't first show them that you value their time and you value their energy that they're putting forth. You are not a boss by any stretch of the imagination. You are someone who is able to kind of see a bigger picture, as many of them do as well. But your role will be to kind of help everybody see the same picture at the same time, and that takes skill and finesse. And so I have him kind of in that path now, with things like go lead the warm-up, or maybe I might be like, make sure that group is on task, and this are the words I want you to use, or what can we say to them to make sure, like maybe there's some kids like screwing around, just kind of like running around or playing or not really doing what they need to be doing, like what can we do to remind each other how we need to be so we can be more productive, things like that. Those are the types of prompts I'd give him. So.
And I assume you're going to be continuing to prompt him as circumstances arise.
Yeah, well, I just don't want anything to go to anybody's head. It can happen, it can happen, especially strong personalities. So if we can harness that energy and harness that confidence in a way that's going to help everybody feel good about the process as well, it's key for me. So.
Exactly, but you're on top of it already and are on the lookout for those sorts of things, and so will be undoubtedly facilitating that process.
Yeah, and the alternate is, and all the rest of the kids, if they see or feel or whatever, this individual is not being respectful, it's their responsibility to tell me. Like, I need to know. It's not just like this kid is a higher up level in that chain of command. No, he's equal to them. He just has other responsibilities that involve telling people where they potentially need to be. So I need the other kids to help him to stay in check by communicating with me as well. So
exactly. Well, hopefully these two additions, as it were, of the high school mentors and this gentleman in the stage management role will help a little bit to address the constant time pressures that you have to deal with. So next up was a discussion with the whole group on calendar awareness. And it sounded like this was a conversation that really allowed the kids to better understand the context within which their creative process takes place. And Allie, I assume the kids found out about the deadlines for all of the key facets of the process, and to help meet those deadlines and ensure that everyone is ready for the performance, I know you're trying to find ways to devote more time to the showcase process. So what are the options you're pursuing that you hope will achieve this, and what are the challenges that make them difficult?
Yeah. There are many challenges to getting everybody in one room together, especially when there's about 30 of them. What I have done in the past is I've chosen one extra day for playwriting conferences, and usually this day lasts until about maybe 3:30 or 4 p.m. I'm pretty flexible at that. It's less formal. We may not have, we'll have some sort of a warm-up or a regrouping in some way, a little decompression activity of some sort, but we're not playing theater games, that's not why we're there. We're there to kind of get down to business. And this has really typically not been an issue. I usually always had done it, I think it was like on a Tuesday, And now this year, for whatever reason, all my kids have primarily like different religious education commitments that they need to tend to. So now all of a sudden, this day that I built my schedule around as having potentially flexible is now not an option, and the days that they're available, I cannot change my days. My days are sort of, I have my own commitments as well, whether they're drama related or otherwise, that are weekly. So that is a big challenge, one. So I considered Fridays not the best day that you want to hang out with a bunch of wonderful humans after school for an hour and a half. Not that it's a bad day. It's just parents want to get their kids home. There's events on the weekend. We're all tired from the week. You know, it's not always the best working day in terms of productivity. But it seemed that might be the only viable option for myself on Mondays. I have a commitment. I teach yoga, and so that's a challenge. After school, I do have my routine that I need to stick to. At least I feel I need to stick to it to kind of make sure I'm balanced so that I can do what I'm doing to the quality at which I aim to. And then also on Fridays, we have no late bus. So our school district, as many as do throughout the week, multiple days of the week, we have a bus that will take kids home later if they have after-school activities. Fridays, as many districts also are this way, do not have that day. So I'm limited to how many kids can actually come if they then need to arrange for rides home or whatever the case may be, which is a genuine issue that is a concern. Right. So my other options, which I also employ, are using the activity period at the end of the day, which is about 20 minutes of downtime. I mean, it's not downtime. We're meeting with teachers, kids are doing homework, whatever. So that's a time I can utilize and meet with groups, but it's a check-in. It's not digging your heels in at all. It'd be like a check-in, plot points, like what are we doing? Okay, we can clean this up, or we can just talk about how we're going to sew something together. It's not necessarily like working time. Excuse me. Luckily, we do have technology on our side now. We have shared docs online that we can use that they can share with me, and we can all be typing at the same time. I can leave comments that they can respond to and resolve and say, got it, and I can see literally the work that they're doing in real time, which is really awesome. That's great as in all fronts for teachers, I think, now. Definitely. So, kids not paying attention, get back to work, jump right in their doc and tell them. It's kind of fun. Yeah, no, it's kind of fun. So I can use that as a tool, which is really helpful. And the other thing that which I haven't done, I usually don't do till we get way closer to performance, not so much during this writing time. I'm usually able to split the time up over the week, which sometimes is better, but I'll get to the point, is extend Wednesdays. So Wednesdays is our typical day. Instead of breaking at 3:45, 4 o'clock, go all the way to a 5 as standard. You know, it's a time that I can really have time together, all together. I know that any other day, whether it be Friday, I'm going to have so few kids, and if I want to extend into Mondays, which I really am reluctant to do, again, so few kids, so like extending Wednesdays is potentially something that I'm very strongly considering. That could be good and bad. It could be good because having the longer, I always feel like our meetings themselves are so short to give them everything, so I have more time. But seeing the kids more times a week is also helpful. Like in the past when this was viable, you know, I progress. I can give them a little assignment, which I know in 2 days I'll see some improvement on. If I just see them for these 2 hours, I might not see anything for a week. They may not remember. They might have forgotten. Those are the fears that I have, you know, in embracing something like that. But it might be our only option. We'll see what happens.
Exactly. So that remains up in the air at the moment. But following that discussion, Allie decided to move forward with the game called Freeze. And if you recall, Allie, you had said that you really wanted to make sure that each session there was one game in addition to the playwriting focus at this stage. But the game was played a bit differently this time. And as we know by now, Allie constantly monitors dynamics in the moment to make adjustments that she thinks will make the work more efficient and effective. And the freeze game in this session, I think, was a great example of both the adjustments made and their benefits. So, Allie, can you explain how that worked?
Yeah. Hallelujah to the mentors. We were able, yeah, I know we had talked in the past ways that I can create more opportunity for various games. It might be partnered games or something like that with this many kids. There's a lot of sitting around. So I was able to break the large group up into 3 smaller groups. So we had 3 different games of freeze happening. I was able to roam around. I had my mentors roaming around or being in a group to help model how do we do this. Kids learned, got opportunities to self-manage themselves. I've always been the one to call freeze when I saw an opportunity that might be great to build on a story or transition into a new story. So now they themselves were calling freeze, which builds on those directing skills, kind of spotting a moment and being able to respond to it, or cultivate one. And honestly, it was super successful. The kids had a great time. I had them grouped arbitrarily, and there were no issues, which is fantastic. I sort of saw like who was where and whatnot, made sure to avoid any conflicts or things that I think could potentially arise because we just don't have time. If something would arise, but at this point, they're good. There's really, they've been fantastic in that realm, which I'm very lucky. So yeah, it was super successful. I'm glad that I gave it a shot and trusted in them, and it was good. It was great. So they got what they needed in the right amount of time.
Terrific. And the mentors are really getting what they needed. And actually, prior to the next step, which was the playwriting, Allie coached the mentors a bit regarding how to mentor a scene writing process. In essence, helping the mentors help the kids find clarity without actually molding the scenes themselves. So with that little bit of coaching, everybody moved into the actual playwriting segment of the day. And as the playwriting progressed, the mentors really saw right in front of them the dynamics that characterize the playwriting process that we, I think, have now come to understand, which is, as Allie says, organized chaos as ideas are considered, tossed out, changed, abandoned, all of this often in a rapid-fire type of way. And just as they did with the freeze game, Allie and her mentors continually moved around the room and checked in with each group. So, Allie, can you give us a brief update on the progress of each group at this point in time? And if you recall from our last videocast, we brought you up to date with these groups then. So now we're going to kind of pick up from that and move forward.
Sure. So we know we had our dead memes scene. They have some more clarity, which is great. I have a strong student who is actually new, and I was like, oh, a new kid. Turns out she has tons of experience, and I'm like, yes, okay. So she's done like camps, and she's in after school theater stuff, and all of this. So it was kind of like, oh, good. Join this group. And she did. She actually really helped them gain more structure. She also had a great demeanor of being able to talk to the other kids in the group in a way that she did not seem like she was pushing into their group. She really presented herself in a way that she was happy to be included in their group, and wow, what are we working on, guys, and da-da-da, which was really, I really appreciated that, because it could have gone any way. I don't know this person very, very well. She's been lovely and sweet any interactions I've had, but I haven't seen her like in group dynamics, so you never know.
Right.
It's really strong. So they have a setting now, they have some characters, they have a start of a plot line, which honestly, hallelujah, that's what we need. So we're going somewhere, not just an idea and a list of things that these guys think are funny. So we're good. We have the cringe comedy. I did talk with that group, and I had a conference with them in terms of creating empathy for an embarrassed protagonist, not just having a protagonist find like retribution for being treated poorly and things like that. And also they had said too that their work was inspired by a particular comedian. So I now have to take my steps to make sure they're not just mimicking or just taking his work, which is huge, especially in comedian land. Like, you do not steal jokes. It's like a major thing. It's like the holy grail. Like, you don't take jokes from a comedian. So I really have to make sure, or if they're going to do that, somehow reference it so they can give credit. If they really feel like they feel strongly about doing something like that. We have our chorus line audition scene. The girls are doing really well with that. There's some appropriateness issues that I think are now addressed, because while this one person who I had the concern for wasn't able to be there that day, her group said, oh yeah, she's not doing that, we changed that, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, all right, good, perfect, sounds good to me.
Hear that?
We have a game show idea, which is kind of cool. 2 girls are developing this. They're on a good path. They had to leave a little bit early, which was disappointing for me because I did not get to check in with them last time because they didn't tell me they were leaving early. So what happened is I did tell them, I said, you have something written? Do you have documentation of where you're at here? And they did, and they shared that with me in an online document. And then we made a plan actually to meet the next day, and we did get to catch up a little bit on what their idea was. I didn't want them to feel pushed aside or like I forgot or something like that. That's not my intention at all. For them to think. So we were able to get touch base, and I got caught up, and they're on a good path. I think it's gonna be strong.
Super.
Yeah. So interestingly, choose your own adventure. I go over to the guys. It was actually, I think I went over to the girls first. It was the Annie and Matilda scenario, and I said, oh, what's going on? Like, how are you guys okay? Like, what's happening with this? And they were all very upset because they said, oh, well, the guys aren't doing their scene anymore. And I go, well, are you sure? Like, have you talked to them? They're like, yeah, we went over there and they said that we're not doing this. I go, well, I said, that group are actually working on 2 different projects. Did they mean they weren't working on this today, or like they're cutting it, like they're not investing any more energy into it? And I was like, I need to find this out for myself, because they really didn't know. They weren't sure. So I went over, I talked with them, and yeah, they had dropped the scene. They really wanted to focus on this cringe comedy thing. They felt too that to construct the choose your own adventure to a level that they felt would be strong might be a little too complicated in the time that we had, which is fine. I mean, I support that. These particular kids too, they're older. They're in like 7th and 8th grade, which honestly, this happens. I have 6th graders that are super, super, super gung-ho, and they're all the time, and then 7th and 8th grade hits. And it's not that they don't have interest in what they're doing or want to invest in what they're doing, but they're allowed to play modified sports, which is great. And so they do. So maybe they're in practice now, and they have all of these other things that they have to balance, which is natural as we get older. We go and how to balance more stuff. So they made a smart choice, I think, because, I mean, they can always maybe try to invest in it for next year ahead of time, knowing that they might want to do this. That's happened in the past as well, where a group really loved an idea, loved it so much that they didn't want to do it wrong. And so they tabled it, but then did it the next year right. So that can happen, and I think, and I'm going to see if they'd like to do that next year. Remind them in the beginning of the year that they had started something like this. So they had dropped it. And so that means the girls, in terms of what they thought the path they were on was now altered and different and not going to align.
Right.
So I talked with them, and I said, well, you could just write your own scene. It doesn't have to have anything to do with anybody else. And they were like, well, we're only 2 people. How can we do that? And I said, well, you would be the lead writers and eventually the directors, but you would write for a bigger cast. You'd have more characters in your scene. And their eyes got very big. And they really, really, really loved that. And when I checked in with them one more time later on, because they were like, oh my gosh, let's do this. And they just went off running. It was actually pretty adorable. They were now Matilda and Adelaide from Guys and Dolls, who was somehow going to teach Matilda how to dance. So we'll see how that one shakes out. Because I don't really, very loose, we'll see.
Okay.
But I was happy, though, honestly, at this stage, in this moment, I was happy that they were able to rectify that feeling of abandonment and also understand that it had nothing to do with them, which was most important. They were able to gain the perspective. With regard to the Choose Your Own Adventure, like I said, it's a bummer that it was dropped. It was a smart choice to drop it, though. And elements that they had talked about, which is sort of creating some of like the staging and design concepts, get that sort of forced choices by the audience sort of a thing. I like that idea. I think that's an interesting sort of vehicle for them to show what they know in a creative way. So I'm going to keep that idea afloat and see if it will kind of stick to anything moving forward, because it's a strong idea. It's really I think it's very bright.
Yes.
Yeah. And then the last scene that was being worked on this day was our Hunger Games. So 2 girls were developing this. They outlined more potential plot lines, which was pretty fantastic. And I am definitely sensing rabbit holes, though. It's one of those stories that, like any, it's the Hunger Games. You can go anywhere. And it's already a hugely embellished story in positive ways. It's very intricate and complex, which makes it good. That's why it's so intriguing. But these girls do need to keep in mind the realities of the context in which we're working, and to be mindful and aware, and to land on some hard choices soon, or else they're going to find themselves drowning in too much content and not know what to do with themselves at that point, or have enough time to organize a cast with multiple battle scenes in it. So
wow,
yeah. So that's kind of where we're at, we've left off in the formal Wednesday meeting.
And as it turned out, Allie was able to have a March 22nd playwriting workshop with conferences. And of course, as you alluded to a little bit earlier, Allie, there was a question, of course, of how many kids could really attend on a Friday for the reasons that she outlined. And in this case, 6 kids were there.
Happy
and
they were there.
Which was good. But they were part of different groups. But they all understood they were there to get work done. And as it turned out, they were very productive. So, Allie, can you summarize what each group, or what became each group, worked on? And in particular, I know that the dynamics of one of the groups were particularly challenging, but resulted in a tremendous learning experience for the kids involved. So if you can share that with us, it's very interesting.
Yeah. I had 2 girls from that chorus line audition scene. They're doing great. Checked in with them. They just worked on their own. Like, they were there, they were present, they had a space, and that's great. I think the 2 girls that were there really seemed to kind of know the ins and outs of the scene as well, so potentially they're probably going to rise up as leaders within that group, which is great, which is interesting to see. We also had 2 kids that just showed up because they knew that work was going to be done, and these were older kids, which I thought was pretty fantastic.
Yeah.
A lot of times, like the 2 girls in the chorus line, you'll be with group partners or whatever, and be like, oh, let's go today, and like a little cluster will show up. So in this case, these are just kids being like, Drama Club needs us, like, let's go, which was really fantastic,
Sure.
So they're very strong veterans, and I asked them to work with me to kind of work out this Annie, Matilda, Allie situation with these other 2 girls that also showed up, which was great. This is where it does get a little bit intense as we started to figure out the story that they wanted to tell, the dynamic that they wanted to kind of show, and the different characters and their relationship, and the fact that they had these ideas like in their heart that they wanted to live out. The girl who was going to be Adelaide was trying to help the girl that wanted to be Matilda live out her role. She couldn't really find herself honestly connecting to that idea or that work, but it was really kind of sweet because she was more concerned with helping this other person experience something that they had so wanted to experience that she kind of lost herself in that a little bit. And she didn't really know what to do with those emotions. And then even as we went through trying desperately, myself and the two older members, to suggest different plot lines, to suggest different, twists and turns that might happen, or ask questions to help them think about these things, neither one of them really were passionately connected to what they could come up with, even with our assistance. So we kind of decided that Matilda would just be Matilda and do a song on her own and have a solo, and she was feeling pretty good about that. She's a very young performer, so I don't know if she will actually be able to completely achieve this goal, and I'll do everything that I can to help her to do so. We have had bold choices like this in the past, that didn't end up happening, even right up through Tech Week, where the kid was like, yeah, I can't. And I'm not going to ever force a kid to do something, especially when it was just their own piece. It had nobody else was, impacted. One could argue, well, you should have made her do it, because she would have learned something about herself and overcoming her fears. But this was a few years ago, this person also, had legitimate anxiety, like definitely was coping with some emotional, situations that were impacting her ability to perform and her confidence and all of that. And we made the decision together that she's going to step down, and we're just going to pluck that right out. And it didn't impact at all the rest of the show. And afterwards, she was like, wow, Mrs. Akers, thank you. Because I don't know about that. I feel so much better that I didn't do that. And she didn't regret not doing it. She's been in multiple things since and been really happy with her work in that way. But at that time, she admitted that she did not feel that she was ready because she did not put in as much time as she thought that she needed.
Interesting.
And I think a lot of her anxieties were in the way of her doing what she really needed to do to achieve where she needed to go. But luckily, very short, like within the week after, just after our show, we met, we talked about it, because I couldn't just let that go. I wanted to have closure and resolve that experience for her, and especially with perspective, which we did, and it was great. So if that would happen with this particular kid, that's okay. And again, she's young, years ahead of her.
Sure.
We can always bring it back. But what was most interesting was we also had one of my older kids was observing the conversation of the two girls and was like, I want to make a suggestion. And I'm like, okay, go for it. And she said to the girl who was wanting to be Adelaide, helping Matilda live out her dream, she said, do you think that maybe you just are suggesting things or not able to see that things are going to work because you don't want to do the scene? Like, you're not really feeling the scene? I feel like I do that sometimes, she said, that I will come up with almost like excuses, reasons, but they're excuses, one after the other, because I don't know how to tell somebody that I can't do this, don't want to do this, am not moved into doing this, but I don't want to be rude or hurt someone's feelings or whatever the case may be. So it was very intriguing that this seventh grader was asking a sixth grader this question about almost like a very strong self-reflection, and then what she's seeing in herself and somebody else, and very diplomatically, without shame or accusing or like you shouldn't be doing that kind of vibe, just asking her like a factual, take a look at yourself question, is that what's happening here? Because the confusion and the emotions that you're going through right now and having this conversation and not knowing how to navigate it, right, really are maybe stemming from this. And now we can find the words to help you express what you need to say without feeling like you're going to hurt somebody's feelings, So I thought that was really beautiful, watching that that come out. We talked about how it's okay to feel when something isn't right for you and how to express that in a way that is not going to like hurt anybody's feelings or anything, because both of these girls are pretty young, you know, and they're not, you know, they don't have a ton of experience in these things. They're 11, you know, like, so it was really awesome to watch the older student kind of help her identify her emotions, express them in a way that she can feel safe and feel intact afterwards, and not intact. And the other girl too got to hear this all happen and be like, oh wow, you really wanted to do this for me. That was really sweet of you. You know, like, that's really great. And that's okay. I'm all right if we move on to other things too. So we had some nice closure on that, you know, and got to talk about when an idea isn't working and how do you manage that if there's relationships involved and all of that. So it was really a beautiful moment, actually.
I mean, look, it sounded like it was a great learning experience for virtually all of them at different levels for different reasons, and pretty fundamental, wouldn't you say, to the process of creation. So really, even though there were 6 kids, as I mentioned before, the session was quite productive. Now for a little bit of a treat, I think. I call this the March 24th Revelations, which happens to be a Sunday. And again, as I spoke about in the beginning of the videocast, Allie's been wrestling with competing needs and conflicting dynamics. And we've gotten a little bit of a taste of the toll that this has been taking on Allie. But I sense that everything really started coming to a head on this particular Sunday. So Allie, it seems from what you shared with me that you really saw the conflicting and challenging dynamics even more clearly, and that the physical and psychological and emotional fallout was really coming in high relief.
Yeah.
So could you share with us or which challenging circumstances were particularly pronounced for you that day, and how you were feeling as a result?
Well, knowing that I can't really have Friday as a standing meeting that everyone can be at, that was really distressing. This upcoming, in general, like, I can't just, like, everybody show up Friday. We know that. We also knew that the week ahead, we had a professional day. Like, teachers come in and have meetings, and we do research or whatever it is that we're doing. So I didn't even have a Friday that week at all to have any kids come that could have come, which means I only had Wednesday. And I said, well, that's not going to work. We just don't have time to only meet once. And knowing that the week that was coming, I knew I had a lot of stuff that had to be tended to and talked about, which might have eaten up some time. So I basically said, all right, I guess we're meeting tomorrow. I guess we're just going to meet Monday. I'm going to squeeze it in after a full day of teaching and before going and teaching yoga and being there for those students in a completely different kind of way, both physically, emotionally, spiritually, all of that. And I just kind of had to resolve that for myself. I also wasn't even sure how many kids would show up, because they would only get that information that morning in the morning announcements, which I knew. I was like, okay, so the odds are not many kids will show up, but I'm going to make myself available. So I definitely had to have some sort of second showing of myself for them. But it is really hard to pull off on that Monday. You know, my typical prep is I polish off my sequence that I had been thinking about over the weekend. We have specific Dharma, which is like talking about a theme for the day that you know, sort of percolates and then eventually finalizes for myself during that time. I physically have to eat. I physically have to rest and meditate and run through my practice so my body is ready. There's a lot that goes on there. Yeah. I usually have about 2 hours to do all of these things, and that goes quite quickly. And in this case, I did not. I had about 20 minutes
Whoa.
in between when all was said and done. It's just really not a lot of time. So that was really challenging, and I'm worried that looking at the calendar, that's going to become the norm, and I'm going to have to sort of surrender to it, and as my yoga practice teaches, trust it, surrender to it, know that if you give it, the attention, it will hopefully work out. I can only do as much as I can do, but it's all you can do, and you can't do it all. And I didn't make that up. One of my yoga friends did. But it is one of my dharmas. When you can't, it's all you can do, and you can't do it all. It's to just do exactly what you have right in front of you and do it as best as you can. So that was the way that I moved forward after making that decision. So, yeah, challenging.
So have you made that decision firmly in your mind? You're like, okay, yeah, I'm going to do it. Yeah, we're going to do Mondays. And how are you going to adjust then?
Yeah, it's going to be a real challenge. I mean, I have done very challenging things. I've worked actually really hard over the years to not overbook myself and not stretch myself to a physical and emotional limit, because I know that isn't beneficial in the long run. So if I am going to actually have to stretch myself, I'm going to have to find places in my life to counter the stress that's going to come of that. I'm going to have to make sure that I'm incredibly prepared, making sure all of the last minute things and letting things percolate. I kind of have to make sure that's just all ready to go Monday. Like there's no tweaking this, there's no changing that. I'm just going to have to make sure and make harder decisions, harder meaning more concrete decisions, earlier than I normally would have, because especially with my yoga, while I am very organized and I have everything aligned and everything is all very, thoughtfully crafted, there's also, as with many of the things that I do, there's an organic sort of element to it. Like if I feel like, I had a run-in with someone earlier in the day and that changes what I talk about, okay, and I need to just be prepared that might still happen, but I have to let go a little bit of my expectation, not of how well I do it, but of how it gets done, or the details, the perfectionism there, that I just need it to be just so, or it didn't fall in line just so I didn't say this way.
Right.
I just have to kind of like let it go, and that's going to be interesting. But I mean, it'll be a new normal if that's what happens. We adjust. You just kind of make it happen. But knowing what I know from the experience now that I have, I'm going to have to find places in my life to create relief moments that are not at all related to like any of this. I think hikes, a lot of hikes in the woods, maybe.
Exactly.
But that'll be part of my plan if this should happen.
And so the Monday preparation that you would normally have done then has to shift to Sunday.
Yeah. The immediate things that I do to prepare, warming up my body, making sure I have food, getting centered, I'm going to need to find ways to do that in a more condensed amount of time. And I think by making sure all of my I's are dotted and T's are crossed in every other realm will give me a little more wiggle room. And also I need to have some firm lines with the kids that I meet. I have to say, we're done at 3:30 and I need to leave. I can't, just because we're on a roll, and that's going to be a challenge. That's definitely a give and take. But I know me, and I know that's what I'm going to have to do. So,
well, let's keep an eye on this. Collectively, I think this will be interesting to see your process in terms of how you deal with these kinds of internal adjustments and how that impacts you and perhaps where it winds up catapulting you at some point.
Hopefully not too far.
Always like,
oh my gosh, yeah.
And then finally, given Allie's decision that Sunday to have meeting the next day on Monday, that was the March 25th extra meeting. And in this case, only 2 girls attended, but again, Allie was not surprised because it was just announced that morning in school. But both girls who attended were from the Hunger Games group. So
they had spoken and said, we're going to go do this, which is great.
Exactly. So in fact, an interesting opportunity arose, and you told me, Allie, that you all got a lot of work done. So can you share the highlights?
I can.
And I guess this would this be what you would consider a conference?
Yes.
With a specific team.
Yes.
Right? Okay.
Yeah. So this would be a playwriting conference. They're in the early stages, so they know what they want. They have a whole bunch of different ideas, and what we needed to do was we had to create a story arc, one that is viable, one that can then be broken up into different teams, so amongst their group they can have just one focus that like 2 girls are working on, and then eventually all those different plot points come together, and together they figure out how do we sew this all in line so that it makes sense. But we can't do any of that without marking our points and where we want the story to go. So I had a ton of ideas. Some were not necessarily completely realistic to produce on the stage. So we talked about alternatives and what can we do that creates the dynamic or the drama or the emotion or context or whatever it is that you're achieving with this, but we can't really do that, so how can we tell this story in a different way? I gained and so did they the clarity of their intention. We identified what the story was about, and I don't mean so much first, second, third scene. I mean, it's about, a girl who, becomes what she wanted to destroy, realizes what, that she's lost herself and tries to, recapture who she is. The theme, basically, we identified. And if everybody kind of has that at their heart, when they're writing, it's kind of like that objective as an actor. You always have this thing to come back to. Does this support that theme? Does this scene, the way that these characters are talking to each other, as I write, support this arc of this character? You know what I mean? So by identifying that, they have an anchor, and then around that, we can get story details. So we're able to have, it's basically going to be a short 1 act, which I think I had sort of anticipated and said, with a lot of potential rabbit holes. We had a big talk about rabbit holes and how do we identify when they're coming or looming or we've just fallen into one, and how do we get ourselves out of them. And so we did. We created a pretty strict structure for their arc. It has about 8 scenes, which sounds like a lot, and it is. It's a lot. But scenes can also be achieved by, narration happening with pantomime action on the stage. So a scene is more in this context, various...
Transition?
Yeah, a transition, or even little stops along the way of a train line. You know what I mean? We know where we're headed, and then we have some that we'll develop more with more dialogue and whatnot to really kind of help flesh out the story and create more depth within the story. But if there are some things that we don't have to tell every single detail with words and language and all the time that it takes to make that happen, is there a way we can show this just visually on the stage or with music happening in the background or lights or whatever the case may be? So we identified 2 places in their story that we can streamline without losing the quality of the story, so that the other places that do need that time and attention of physical pages and physical minutes on the stage get honored in that way too. So it was a strong meeting. We're going to see what they do with this, if they stick to it, if it gets complicated. It's never done. What I mean by that is the first arc, especially something this complex, it's likely going to have little branches that are going to come off, and we're going to start pruning again, or snipping and kind of following that trail and seeing where it takes us. But I'm going to be very on top of them about being on top of themselves, of what they're managing, because I don't want them to feel short at the end and then rush to finish and not feel good about their work. It's that quality versus quantity ratio that they're going to be keeping in mind along the way.
Well, that image of pruning, I think, is really evocative and helpful, and I think I imagine that if you understand that pruning is not cutting off a limb,
No,
cutting off a vital
it's
part of
not.
yourself, but in fact is a factor that facilitates your getting to be where you want to go, and everything you do is in service of your of the story and of that key theme.
Yeah, we keep it healthy. Keep
You
the
know,
story healthy.
I mean, I
Burning
guess
it.
I would imagine part of your job then is reframing the process to understand what its purpose is and why, in fact, it's beneficial, as opposed to, I would think, possibly the kids experiencing multiple losses.
Yeah.
I mean, this was my idea, my baby, I developed it. I can't have it, which was one of the things I was alluding to before, that tension between needing to move things along through this pruning process, but also really being attuned to your kids and helping them to, I think, understand the process, understand its impact on them, resonating that, and so forth.
Yeah,
so.
and I prepared them too, like with that conversation, with that part of the conversation. I said, well, let's look at our plot points right now. Let's look at our arc. What might have to go? I'm not saying that right now it's going to have to go, but let's identify things that maybe are, secondary or even tertiary to what path we're on here. And they identified a couple of things, which is great. And I'm not trying to preemptively cut parts of their scene. I'm building the skill of what you're talking about.
Exactly.
What can get sort of pushed to the side because it's not directly related back to telling the essence and the core of the story that we're trying to tell. And that's a skill, so that I've had them play that out in case it does come to that. They're prepared emotionally and also skill-wise, that's the one that's got to go. It's gone. And without, getting upset or feeling like their work is being tossed into the trash, because it's not the intention, obviously.
Right, and so stick with us through this process, because it'll be interesting to see if we note a facsimile of this dynamic as you conference with each group, and perhaps, they learn more about identifying and avoiding rabbit holes. They learn more about understanding that this is the nature of the work and it's not a personal
objectivity
attack, and so on and so forth. And maybe you could share with us how that dynamic played out a little bit for each group, how the kids took in that information and what they did. So to be continued, and we will, or I will try to stay on top of remembering to ask Allie how she is coping with the adjustments that she's making for herself. And I'm sure that there will be a pretty large range of emotional experiences, as there are in life for everything.
Yeah.
But we thank you for sharing it with us, because again, I think it really helps us to have a sense of how we can investigate these kinds of internal experiences, and in a way really giving permission to say, hey, it's okay to do this. Expect that it's not a straight line, it's not a smooth line.
No.
It never is, and it's okay. You're not doing anything wrong. So I will try to remember to keep checking in about that vis-a-vis the kids and Allie. So do stay with us for this fascinating process as we come into the last 8 weeks or so of this year's drama club.
Thank you.
Thank you.